Hi, good morning, Brett. Good morning, Stephen. Good morning, Avinash. Welcome, Mr. Chris and Dr. Uttam. Thank you for joining today. And this session is basically focusing on cold is hot, where vaccine distribution and the future of cold storage and cold logistics. And the event Asia Cold Chain Show is scheduled from 20 to 24th of September. It's a virtual event. And today, Mr. Brett Marshall, who is the corporate head quality assurance, Sweden Pharma Singapore, going to moderate this session. We have other panelists who are from Dr. Uttam Krishna. He is a regional quality and premix RA manager, Asia Pacific from DSM Nutritional Products. Mr. Avinash Verma, who is a general manager and lead cold chain pharma operations, pharma retail, and e-commerce Reliance Retail from India. We have Mr. Chris Kato Smith, who is a managing director from Freshport, Thailand. We have Mr. Dr. Stephen Husu, head of commercial quality, Southeast Asia and South Korea, Boringal, Singapore Private Limited. Thank you so much, and over to you, Brett.
Thank you, Prashant, and good day to our attendees wherever you may be. We have the next hour spent discussing why cold chain is so hot at the moment in the context of supply chain and the pharma industry. My name is Brett Marshall, as Prashant mentioned, and I'm the corporate head of quality assurance for Zuellig Pharma, which is one of Asia's largest healthcare services providers. And we have an extensive ecosystem of people, process, infrastructure, systems and technologies supporting our temperature controlled management capability. And we represent predominantly multinational pharma companies operating across 13 countries in Asia, nearly 100 years since we started the business here, and we have about 13,000 employees around the business. It's great to be here with my co-panelists, and I might start by asking them to give a brief introduction to themselves, and then we'll get into some of the questions that we have this afternoon. So, Stephen, if I could pass to you, if you could give a brief introduction of who you are and what your current role is.
Sure. So, hello everyone. My name is Stephen Su. I am the commercial quality head for Boehringer Ingelheim. Boehringer Ingelheim has its main business as human pharma, but we also have a big animal health business in the region. Currently, our products do actually include normal cold chain 2 to 8, and also extreme cold minus 20, also minus 80, also liquid nitrogen. Thank you very much, Brett.
Thanks, Stephen. Avinash, across to you.
Thanks, Brett, and good morning, everybody. Good morning, all the panelists and the attendees. So my name is Avinash Verma, and I'm representing Reliance Retail Pharma Division. It's related to the storage and distribution of pharmaceutical products within India. So we are dealing with B2B as well as B2C consumer healthcare business, as well as e-commerce, that is the e-pharmacy. So my role over here is to lead the cold chain operation part, where I devise the strategy for cold chain warehousing and distribution for Pan India to ensure the best quality of pharma products are delivered to the end users, and setting up of cold chain operations for different products, which could be, you can say, biologicals, then vaccines, biosimilars, generic medicines, as well as specialty drugs. And my responsibility is also to partner with all stakeholders, the vendors, like who are involved in the cold chain service, providing capabilities that they have. So that could be mostly the warehouse companies, the logistics and the transportation companies, then even the cold chain monitoring companies, and so on. And then overall process implementation and project monitoring is also my role and responsibility. So thanks, Brett. So this is my introduction.
Thanks, Avinash. Dr. Uttam, if you could tell us a little bit about your background and what your current role is.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. My name is Dr. Uttam. I'm working as a QA and regulatory head for DSM Asia Pacific. I'm based in Bangkok. In DSM, our main business is nutrition. When we say nutrition, means animal nutrition, human nutrition. We manufacture all kinds of vitamins. Plus, we also have a food specialty products, enzymes, liquid enzymes, and powder enzymes. Plus, we also manufacture pharmaceuticals. So, and I'm excited for this conference. Brett, thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Dr. Uttam. And finally, to one of the guys that I think I've known longest in the Asia region, and especially around cold chain logistics, Chris Caddo-Smith.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I think it's over 30 years, mate. It gets to be a very small world in our community. But first of all, I'd just like to reach out and say hello to the audience who's supporting this event. And you know, certainly it's a changed world to the one that we used to be able to meet personally. Yeah, Chris Caddo-Smith. I've been in Asia now 25 years with an Australian origin. I've spent more time outside Australia than I have here. And I have been operating a two-lane business for the last 15 to 20 years. On one side, it's an operational value-added logistics service, and I provide specialist cold chain services to large organizations, airlines, forwarders, pharmaceutical brands. I'm based primarily I'm based at Bangkok Airport and Bangkok Flight Services, and I'm handling at the moment special care for import pharmaceutical handling. And I'm unique in that I actually operate airside, and I'm going out to aircraft with specific temperature sensitive or time critical shipments, and shepherding those goods all the way through the breakdown, storage and release to custom clearing agents. I also do an export service, which is unique in its respect. The aim of that service is to remove risk, provide better visibility, and import care specifically for very time sensitive and temperature sensitive commodities. And most recently, we're now handling COVID vaccine shipments and transshipments. On the other side of the company, I have a consulting business, and that's my forte, where I've been operating across the region, specifically in Southeast Asia, on implementing cold chain solutions from large-scale facilities, and our company's just finished the concept design review and implementation support of 5 pharmaceutical logistics centres across Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And right now, the consulting projects that I'm doing is focused. We're contracted to the Asia Development Bank, providing specialist logistics advisory. Currently, my project has covered 4 countries: Indonesia, Cambodia, Laos, and right now I'm working on Philippines in the end-to-end supply chain strengthening program that's associated with the Asia Development Bank loans for vaccine support. So it's a big project, and it's expanding rapidly as Asia Bank are applying its resources and diligence to other developing countries across the Pacific region. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so we might get into a few questions, and I guess you know, as we've been through the experience of dealing with the COVID pandemic over the last 18 months to 2 years, we've certainly seen supply chain appear in the media and on the front page of newspapers and magazines more than we've probably ever seen it before. Also important to that process has been the evolution of vaccines, and I wonder if I could ask my panelists what would their thoughts be on how vaccine distribution has evolved across the region, and any areas that they have identified where process and infrastructure systems have improved. Stephen, if you would like to share your thoughts on that question. You're on mute, Stephen.
So thank you, Brett. So I think in terms of the infrastructure where it has improved, actually, I'd like to quickly first talk about different types of medicines and also the storage requirements. This is really the first with the COVID vaccine. This is the first time we've seen a massive rollout of a particular product type, the mRNA-based vaccines. Previous vaccines are either viral vectors or most commonly inactivated. In most cases, the human pharma vaccines require 2 to 8 storage. But for animal vaccines, we have actually history of requiring storage of down to -80, or actually storage in liquid nitrogen in order to maintain the viability of the products. Why is it so important? Of course, it's because we need to make sure that the product retains the antigens in the right state so that the body, human body or animal body, can actually start to recognize these proteins. If you break down the proteins due to improper storage, of course, actually that's not really a big problem for the patient. It's just that they will gain immunity to something that they will not see. So it's absolutely critical to maintain the integrity of the product to make sure that you get the right immune response. In terms of improvements, I think that there has been massive improvements across CIASC, and I think you're actually much better positioned to actually review that question, Brett. But I think the challenge, of course, is the requirements locally by the different regulatory authorities, which have not always been the most consistent. There's also a separation of government bodies. Of course, for human pharma, since we're talking about COVID-19 vaccines, it's typically under the Ministry of Health. However, customs and importations are often under a different government body. And we've seen across the region that sometimes the customs at certain locations in certain parts of the region are simply not able to maintain the cold chain storage for products that are coming in. The customs officers may require products to be taken out of cold chain for a physical inspection. And we have temperature loggers that clearly track which customs ports of entry are unable to maintain even the minimum cold chain, which is 2 to 8, not to mention the other more extreme types of cold chain. I think particularly for COVID, since there is so much attention on this, every time there's a shipment in, and certainly for the first shipment into Singapore last December, if I recall correctly, and Zulik was involved there as well, there's a lot of media and press. Everybody makes sure that it's done, but we need to keep this robust process on a day-to-day level, not just a one-off for one shipment or only shipments of COVID vaccines. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks, Stephen, and absolutely so right. We've never seen a supply chain challenge like this. We're basically dealing with an incredible demand for a product which in Asia in particular has been in such short supply so far. And so that puts pressure on us to have supply chains performing at almost zero defect capability. And that is quite an interesting challenge for the industry. Avinash, if I could ask your thoughts on how you've seen distribution across the region and perhaps some of the improvements that you've seen, and particularly around India, because India's certainly built its capability for vaccine production and distribution over recent years.
Yes, Brett, from the Indian perspective, the Indian vaccine distribution network is being operated through government. So the central government, they have 4 government medical store depots. So those are the central units where we are stocking the products, when we are buying it from the manufacturer directly. And from this government, 4 government medical store depots, it goes to the state vaccine storage units. So there are total around 53 state vaccine storage units as well. So either it is being catered from the government stores, or it is also been directly procured from the manufacturers. And from that state vaccine storage unit, this is being further percolated to the regional and then the regional districts as well as the sub-district levels, which has the cold chain points. And these cold chain points are the places where we have the infrastructure already built, like it is through having an ILR placed, and then the deep freezers, then the vaccine carriers, they are placed over there. And from there, it moves to the primary health center or the consumer health centers that is available where the vaccination is happening. So this is the overall picture about like how the flow happens in India from the government perspective. In fact, in India, we have around 27,000 cold chain points, and then 76,000 cold chain equipments, 700 reefer vans, 5,000 cold chain handlers, and 2.5 million health workers. Still, like seeing the population of 1.4 billion of India, like there is an excess need of two to three times more infra readiness is required. And to cater this, again, like the corporates are also like supporting the government. So they are also like providing their services aligned with the government to provide the vaccination. So even the monitoring of these vaccination is happening through the EVIN, that is the Electronic Vaccine Intelligence Network. So that is through which like we are able to like map and then see like what is the stock available, and based on that like the consumption pattern is being considered. So the improvement point of view, what I see is like there is a requirement to increase the distribution capacity as well as the equipments. So where again the private players are coming together, and then there is a collaboration that's happening which is supporting. And then again another part is about the temperature monitoring accuracy. So that's where like there is an importance required, where again most of them are temperature sensitive products, that the vaccine mostly again, and different vaccines have different temperature ranges. So we have to have a monitoring mechanism, so that which should be as per the GDP compliance point of view. Then preservance of more like you can say trained cold chain handlers should also be in place. So to cater the demand, to improve the facility to report the stock out. So there are cases where we found in India there was a stock out because of the dependency and the population where we have to vaccinate major of it, where again the manufacturing is only at two of the companies and there was a pressure on them. So there we have to see like how we can minimize that and how like we can have an inventory planning in a better way. Another part is about the investigation of the vaccine safety. So the pharmacovigilance part, that also we have to have in place, so that like it is also required an attention, so that like we'll be able to understand what are the adverse events that's happening like after the vaccination is been done. So these are some of the challenges and the improvements areas where we need to like think of from India perspective.
Thanks, Avinash. Some really good points there, and especially you know, the role that government has been playing, or the increased role that government has had in the vaccines distribution or the management of vaccines distribution, and I guess especially in the COVID context. And I'll come back to Chris on that one in a moment, but I'll just ask Dr. Uttam, from what you see in Thailand and from the manufacturing aspect, how have you seen cold chain distribution evolve, and some of the improvements that may have been implemented from a manufacturing perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I can share there's some compliance study recently done by the Department of Health, CDC, and also from AC Nielsen. So actually, as a summary, there are only 4 technology available in the market. What we say whole virus vaccine, which is like Sinopharm and Sinovac, mRNA or RNA, which is like Pfizer, non-replicating vector like AstraZeneca, Sputnik, and we have some protein-based. So only 4 technology we have. So as per AC Nielsen and Department of Health, CDC, the main challenge they are saying is the production capacity, because demand is very high and very difficult to forecast, and forecast accuracy, this kind of thing is not applicable here. Everybody need to be vaccinated. So they suggest that we need to work on the best utilization of your OE, overall equipment efficiency, because any manufacturing line, we have some standard capacity, how we can use it in a better way. Then use of risk-based approach for speedy approval, regulatory approval, because every vaccine before launch, it need an approval from the local authority. So, and full clinical trial, very difficult because is a super urgency. So how to do a shortcut, not a shortcut, like a risk-based approach. And then third is the storage condition, because there is a stability study done by all these manufacturers like Pfizer, for Sinovac and Sputnik, AstraZeneca, etc. So if storage conditions are not followed, then it means we are compromising on product safety and efficacy, and also there'll be the human risk. So suggestion is like throughout the supply chain, start from the manufacturing to the distribution, storage, and handling. The storage has to be maintained as per the declaration, because every manufacturer, they declare the storage condition, for example, -70° or whatever temperature. So that need to be followed, and we need to ensure that the storage condition, warehouse, for example, it has to be mapped. The temperature mapping has to be done, and during transit, the value of MKT, or they say mean kinetic temperature, need to be established, validated, and temperature mapping, no compromise. So basic norms of like good distribution practices, good distribution and storage practices, good warehouse practices need to be followed. So this kind of knowledge we always need to inculcate in minds of every pharmacist, warehouse team, manufacturer, so that overall efficacy and the safety is maintained. So I'm just sharing this study. This is the official study done by the AC Nielsen and the Department of Health, Brett. So that's all from my side.
Thanks, Dr. Uttam. And I think a really good point, again, they're touching on the regulatory frameworks that are in place. And Stephen mentioned this earlier. And, you know, one of the challenges that we've had in Asia, I think, for a number of years is that efforts to really harmonise regulation have been quite challenging. But what we have started to see is a convergence of international regulation, and especially with organisations such as ICH and PICS, it's starting to influence the local regulatory frameworks of the country. So we're not really getting direct harmonisation, but it's kind of this concept of convergence, and that I think that's had a big impact on the management of GDPs and the governance of temperature-controlled environments as well. Chris, I'd like to pass to you to get your ideas on what you've seen, and particularly if you can touch on how you've seen governments and private organisations, the private industry institutions that are increasingly collaborating in some of their efforts for vaccine distribution across some of the markets that you've seen.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Yeah, the comments before are particularly enlightening on the handling requirements of the vaccines. But what I've been seeing is actually the temperature control in the countries I've been working in has actually been effective. You know, for whatever constraints there were 4 to 5 months ago, they've certainly, the 4 countries I've been working in have addressed some of the cold chain, ultra cold chain issues quite tactically, even if it's with a very limited constraint of storage capacity. Vaccines are getting to the vaccination centres. We're not hearing of a lot of wastage. We're not hearing a lot of write-off. That would have been anything unusual from history. But what Brett, you're talking about is the interaction and the collaboration between private sector and government. And I've got to share the very great initiative that I'm seeing in the Philippines at the moment, where a national task force has been set up, and it's a multi-sector, non-partisan group of industry, of local government units, ministries of health, the office of the president and the communications have integrated extremely well. And tactically, every single day there's an allocations reporting committee, and although going backwards, the vaccination targets that they've set are being met largely across multiple local government units. But the thing we are seeing is very much hand-to-mouth supply of vaccines and supporting equipment into those LGUs, and they're meeting their targets. But if you are part of the allocations committee, or the part of the allocations group of very, very willing and talented people doing their very, very best, going backwards, there is a gap in the overall visibility across the supply chain, and that's something that's a reality. We see the procurement of vaccines coming in, and originally supply was constrained, so the allocation of vaccines was on a push model based on population ratio, and that worked. Very simple replenishment triggers going into the Central Ministry of Health logistics facilities, and literally as vaccines were coming in, they were being allocated on a pre-agreed basis. Naturally, priorities change, and there's a very effective committee in place that deals with that with good, decisive, integrated public and private sector inputs. I was part of various discussions where there needed to be rebalancing of inventory between regions to meet the daily vaccination targets. Very much like fighting a war on all fronts. There just has to be ammunition every single day to keep the enemy at bay, and that's exactly what we're seeing. The resupply and putting resilience into that supply chain is the next challenge, and that's where integrated logistics, visibility and systems are essential. And to a large extent, that's where the advantage of the established logistics pharmaceutical distribution companies have. They have the integrated systems already, and they are supporting their distribution channel strategically and very effectively. There is an overlay where specific brands are choosing private sector versus public sector distribution channels, and what I'm seeing there is good coordination across this incredibly complex distribution channel of the Philippines, for example. I've seen a huge amount of effort going into using quite basic tools, reporting tools. There are plans in place to improve those, and it's very encouraging to see how everyone is coordinating together. You get into the smaller countries, and generally the ministries of health have heavily relied on the agencies. For example, specifically UNICEF, and UNICEF are they're a very professional organization, and they have some very, very talented pharmaceutical logistics operators in place. They have established supply chain procurement processes in place, and that's been a very great support in the least developed countries that we see. But there's a whole expanse of countries out there. The least developed nations in the Pacific Islands at the moment don't have much support, established support at the moment. So they're probably the next frontier. So that's sort of it. Very, very tactical, a huge amount of passion into the work, and no, everyone is collaborative and supportive. The one key thing is probably come out, and you talked about improvements, is the opportunity for real-time or near real-time visibility of goods in motion, goods in transit. And now the technologies are available. The IoT tracking and tracing systems now provide much better visibility, but very few have been deployed because very few are certified for WHO handling. But that's the new frontier, is being able to track product in transit where supply is short and the demand is very, very high across multiple areas, seeing where the goods are and making sure you don't lose visibility. The other thing that's a big improvement, and we talked about temperature, if you remember now, if you remember the first shipments of COVID coming into the countries at the various airports, they were being treated like international, the shipments were being treated like international rock stars, where you're getting the press on the tarmac, and they were actually opening Envirotainers on the tarmac and holding vials out. That sort of was the first shock of the industry, but that's now largely normalized. And the key thing is now is that we're seeing a lot. I handle vaccines at Bangkok Airport, and they're coming in ambient. And the big breakthrough in technology is the trust that they have in thermal, frozen and ambient shipping. It's now become normal to ship up to 72 hours in an ambient condition. That's a real breakthrough. And 72 hours is enough to get it from the manufacturer into a proper distribution facility. That's the big breakthrough I see, is the technology enhancements of the packaging and the phase change control. Very, very important now. And also learning that certainly the RNA, the Pfizers, for example, they can actually be transported as long as you know that you're going to consume them within 2 weeks. The stringency for long-term storage in ultra cold chain is less. You can actually move them towards the vaccination points with less stringent temperature control, as long as they're going to be consumed. So that's it in a nutshell. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Chris. And I think some really good points there around, the way that technology is starting to influence the way that we manage cold chain. If we could kind of step back from COVID a little bit and look at vaccines in a more general sense, one of the areas that we've seen governments really influence basically the distribution of vaccines is through implementation of universal access programs in various countries in Asia. So I'd like to maybe ask our panelists how they've seen the impact of the introduction of these universal access programs and the extent to which they've influenced how vaccines and how vaccination programs occur in countries. And Stephen, I might ask you for your thoughts on that to begin with.
Actually, Brett, I think I may not be the best person to do that, as part of the interaction with the government authorities are dealt with by a different function than mine. Could I pass that off to somebody else, please?
Sure. Dr. Uttam, you have any observations from working in Thailand and the universal access program that the Thailand government has introduced? Dr. Uttam, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes, sorry, Brett, I was on mute. So basically, I'm just reading the AC Nielsen report, because actually harmonization for the regulation, like for example, in Thailand, we have Thai FDA, Singapore, we have HSA. So these are not harmonized. So, what they have done, they have taken help of a third-party organization, which is in alignment with CDC. They are saying world travel, basically, especially on the distribution part, because as I said, there are only 4 technology available in the market, like whole virus, mRNA, non-replicating, and the protein-based. And the distribution is not same. Manufacturing process is not same. In terms of final efficacy, also not same. So, and harmonization in this short time is very difficult. So FDA, they have suggested that we need to prepare a risk-based approach. So they use the term called RPN. RPN is the risk probability number. So for every vaccine, for example, Sinopharm, if you want to launch in Thailand, if you want to distribute in Thailand, so Thai FDA in Nonthaburi, they calculate the RPN of Sinopharm and Sinovac. They have a calculation based on the manufacturing process, which is very confidential. They also have a distribution system. So basically it's a calculation. So they calculate RPN. If RPN is between the standard value, agreed value between the Sinopharm and the authority, they say it's okay, go ahead. If not, then they say you have to hold it for some time, and then another batch, they can use it. So for every batch, they declare the RPM, and if RPM is okay, then only they can distribute. Similarly for now Moderna, they will be having very soon in Thailand. So Thai FDA, Department of Medical Sciences, under Thai FDA, they have already calculated the RPM value. because the limitation is actually to launch any vaccine, we need to have a all phase 4 clinical trial. And because of time constraint, because of urgency, all this manufacturer, they don't have a complete study, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. So they just use this RPN value based on whatever data they have. Like sometimes they have kind of safety assessment, maybe some clinical study, some stability study. So this is the rationale now, Brett, they're using. So this is all from my side.
Thanks, Dr. Uttam. We might jump to another question, which is looking at some of the lessons that, we talked a little earlier about improvements that we've observed. But clearly, we're starting to see an increase in, or we have over the past five years, probably a little bit more than that, seen an increase in the number of biological type products and vaccine type products which are being developed and manufactured and distributed. So I guess I'd like to maybe ask our panelists how they think, based on the improvement that we've seen so far, what areas are there for, or opportunities are there in the Asia region to strengthen the cold chain further and to make vaccines more accessible to patients across the varied geographies that we operate. And Avinash, I'd like to start out by asking your thoughts on that.
Yes, Brett, what I think that there is a demand for the cold chain due to various climatic changes, as well as various again perishable goods, that is fruits, vegetables, diseases that's coming up. Even pharmaceutical requirements has increased, and after this pandemic, the requirement of cold chain has been again understood in a quite better way, that okay, there should be a stringent regulation, it should be in place, and there should not be any unbroken cold chain. So there should be a complete cold chain procedure, so that from the manufacturer it reaches to the end user without any breakage of the cold chain. So again, the demand will increase. Reason behind is that major population is going towards the aging side. So it's geriatric population is increasing, and the next every 5 years there will be an increase of around 20% of the population. So in that case, the healthcare requirement will increase. So that is also will be leading to a demand of cold chain. Again, there is a demand of the convenience, customers are now feeling that okay, they should get everything at home. So it's the digital part had also enhanced. The technology has also come where again things can be delivered to their doorsteps. So there the e-commerce plays a critical role, where it's a B2C, that is business to customer. So it's going directly to the customer. So for that, there should be again a mother warehouses that need to be developed, and it should be also temperature controlled, so that when we are dispatching it, again during the dispatch also it should be into the again a validated shipper should be used, or a reefer van which is also validated should be used. Even we have to see the tag, that is turnaround time. So at how fast we will be able to deliver it. So that's where is the challenge, and most of the e-commerce companies are trying to fulfill the tag requirements. So that is to minimize their the duration of the shipment. So that's where again it's a challenge which is getting mitigated, and again there is a demand which is arising. Again, as Brett, you mentioned about the cell and gene therapy, which is coming up. So that will be requiring again ultra cold temperature requirements, which will be ranging from -4 till 150 degree as well, -150 degree as well, and beyond. Okay, so again, there is again a challenge which is there, which will be for which there will be a requirement. Biologicals, biosimilars are also coming up. So again, most of our pharmaceutical products, 60% of it will be bio-based. So that will be required temperature control. So that's the reason, again, there is an opportunity in Asia, and also about the climatic change that initially I talked about. The Asian region is quite hot. So in that case, how we will be able to have a validated shipper in place, how we will be able to monitor the temperature, the track and trace also should be in place. Even the sterilization process, the barcoding and all should also be in place. So there is a lot of rooms of development in the supply chain, and there even the vendors are also like working. Most of our cold chain, you can say providers, are working in their domain to enhance and to improve the efficiency, to minimize the risk of cold chain like wastage and deviations. So these are most of the points what I see, that there are opportunities which companies are taking it ahead and they are working on it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Avinash. Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. There's a range of factors that are really driving what's likely to be an increase in demand for temperature-controlled facilities, and specifically cold chain, and as you touched on, ultra-low temperature storage as well. Chris, some thoughts from your perspective on where you see further improvement may be possible based on your background of building facilities and some of the experience you've had?
I think I couldn't agree more with the previous comments, that there are actually a whole lot of interdependencies, and that's the challenge. You can have very good cold chain, but unless you have control over your dependencies like PPE, facilities, available resources, healthcare facilities, healthcare workers, you know, the cold chain can actually be isolated, can be working very well, but its effectiveness can be lost because of the lack of interconnectivity with other dependencies. So that's an important fact, and that's actually probably one of the big challenges now, is to get that integration going. And in a way, you know, this particular pandemic is driving improvements that hopefully will be sustainable, not just for COVID, but sustainability of effective healthcare chains, because the regular vaccination programs still have to proceed. We're not going to eliminate the need for all of the existing vaccination programs that aren't getting highlights anymore, but maybe this is a wake-up call, an opportunity to develop sustainable, robust healthcare systems that have some form of interoperability between the agencies. The other thing that I'm seeing is that a lot of the good initiatives that, you know, I've dealt with 3 or 4 different very, very good and professionally set up vaccination MIS systems, aren't getting through the gauntlet of the Ministry of Health procurement processes, because there isn't the level of knowledge in how to even write a procurement specification, and you know that can actually block the rapid implementation of a very effective vaccination supply chain in a developing country, is the procurement process. And having good, you know, maybe coming down from the World Health Organization's a good boilerplate RFP requirements to save the countries the effort in trying to work these up themselves. The other trade-off that I'm seeing is the cost versus value criteria, where you know, particularly in the developing countries, you know, the not viewing this as an overall system. They're just looking at individual outsourced programs, and a lot of the value is being lost end to end. Again, the key point there is we shouldn't just be building this for COVID. There should be a much more strategic build approach, and I've never been involved in anything that has brought me closer with a range of colleagues across all disciplines, and this is an opportunity for us to get smarter, more integrated work planning, and the ability to help ministries of health, for example, contract out smarter, and getting better value of those processes. The agencies are excellent, but they're not the magic answer by themselves. So, you know, this is a wonderful time for us to put in a sustainable healthcare environment. You know, so in a way, it's a wake-up call.
Great point, Chris. Very, very important, the degree of transparency and collaboration that's being established as a part of this process. I just wanted to jump back a step and maybe ask Stephen if he can just reinforce for us. We talk about biologicals and traditional type vaccines. What's the difference between these two as a product or as a medication? What is it that's so special about a biological?
So thank you for that, Brett. Actually, it's actually also adding on to what Avinash has mentioned in terms of where the industry is going. And there are many drivers for this, and especially in Southeast Asia or Asia as a whole, which is actually seen as a driver for growth for a lot of pharma companies. But the first main issue is that the major players are gravitating towards biologics as a product. Partly the most important reason actually is the intellectual property. The barrier to entry for a generic once a patent has expired for a small chemical is very low. The formulation is put out there. You have a certain limited time of marketability before you lose the exclusivity. And we know that even before the license expires, the patent license expires, generic companies are submitting small molecules because everything's out there. You can find it. However, for biologics and cell-based type products, you need a cell line, and that cell line is kept very secure in the manufacturing site. So, from the regulatory perspective, what they are actually asking for in terms of application for biosimilar is almost similar to the same level that you require for a new drug application. You need the clinical trials, and that's actually the highest barrier to entry. You need hundreds of millions of dollars to conduct a clinical trials and to follow up with your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You can't just do a bioequivalence test like you can do for a small chemical. I was mentioning in terms of the stability of the product. I think actually back to vaccines then, to answer the second part of, or to address the second part of your question, vaccine is actually such a unique product. In almost every other product that we give to humans, there's an acceptable, cost versus benefit. You accept certain side effects because you want the positive therapeutic effects. So one of the products that have the greatest side effects is, of course, cancer therapy. It attacks all growing cells, which is why people lose their hair, because your hair is growing, your skin thins out, your intestinal skin thins out, you lose your red blood cells because these are replicating all the time. Now, for vaccines, we accept very little side effects because I can think of the only product that's given to completely healthy people. And what's more is it's also, you only have one chance to get it right. If you think that you injected a good vaccine and actually it has been detrimentally affected due to improper handling, the person would not know until they get sick if the vaccine is 100% effective. In terms of the stabilities, actually, it was also mentioned by other panelists. Actually, looking at the effectiveness of vaccine is really, really difficult. And I speak from experience from inside the health authority evaluating clinical dossiers of applications, because it's not that you can just take a chemical product and assay the amount of chemical in a particular tablet. You actually know, you have your viral particles, you have your inactivated proteins, you potentially have mRNA. Whether that creates an antigen or creates an antigenic response, and then what we call a seroconversion level to make sure that a certain number of protective antibodies are actually created, that is actually the key question. So whether an animal creates that kind of a response is, again, completely different. We cannot be sure that the mice is the same as a human. So we do need human clinical trials. And that's why approving a vaccine is actually quite unique. Also, looking at the effectiveness of the product, you actually can't just test it and get a result in a couple hours like small chemicals. It is quite unique in terms of a product.
Fantastic. It wasn't an easy question for you to answer, but I think you did a really good job of articulating the differences around biologicals and vaccines and why they're so important, and why the management of product integrity and patient safety is so important here. Dr. Uttam, you have some comments on on what further improvements we may be able to make in cold chain management?
Yeah, Brett. The demand of cold chain product, especially vaccine and all the medicines, will be high for sure. And why? Because for rapid therapeutic effect, less side effect, as explained by Dr. Stephen. But the challenge would be the space constraint, because all it need a controlled temperature. And in Asia, like there are a lot of warehouse, but still looking to the demand, the forecast, space is a big constraint. And even if we have a space, then validation would be the big challenge. How to validate the cold room? For example, we have to validate of a temperature, say 2 to 8, minus 20 degree or minus 70 degree. Still, there is a lack of in-depth knowledge how to validate, because some people say that validation in a empty load, like suppose they build up the warehouse because of commercial reason, and they start putting the stocks, and they say they will validate in a dynamic mode. Some people say empty load. So that kind of in-depth knowledge. Also, this FDA feel like maybe some more knowledge and more guidance or more protocol, like how to make the protocol more effective because validation is the key. If you have a good validation, then you can assure that your product is safe for sure. So these two things, and yeah, that's all.
Great points, and I think that also, resonates with some of Chris's comments too on how we're basically looking to establish some templates for the future. And I think it's one of the interesting things, on a regulatory perspective that has been achieved on a global basis. Because when you think about it, in the past, vaccines took between 10 and 15 years to bring to, actually having patients having access to it. And that's from the time of development to the time of use. In the case of COVID, we had that process happen much, much faster. And a big contribution came from the way that regulators have put in place, particularly in Europe and the US, have put in place the mechanisms to make the approvals process work much faster. And processes which were linear in the past are now they're now looking to run many of these processes in parallel, and I think that contributed very much to how we were able to get a COVID vaccine out for public use almost within 12 months. So quite remarkable, and I believe that that's a trend that will continue. We're running very close to time. I'm going to ask our panelists now for maybe 2 bullet points each on why cold is hot and how you see the current situation and what's coming next. And then we'll be able to wrap the panel up. But I do thank my panelists for some interesting discussion this morning and this afternoon. So Stephen, first to you, a couple of closing bullet points.
Thank you so much, Brett. 2 bullet points. Actually, I think this is almost beating a dead horse, but yes, cold is hot. Where the trend is going is high value products. I mean, we talked about vaccines, we talk about mRNA as a new technology, we talk about biologics, cell and tissue therapy, gene therapy. These are all going to be cold chain, no doubt, or ultra cold chain. And these are the money makers. I hate to say, some of the companies for CAR T, chimeric antigen receptor T cell therapies are upwards of $500,000 per therapy, but they're guaranteed work for a couple number of years. Number 2 is I think we really need to work with the local players. I think you've said it quite well, and Brett, that there is an interjection of you not only need the infrastructure, you need the processes, you need the systems. And certainly, I think that across the region, and certainly some countries, regrettably, also have a high geographic challenge. I mean, if we talk about Indonesia and Philippines, the number of islands, the number of infrastructure is very difficult to support that. Now, how do we get the quality medicine to those people in the cities, fine, but now we have to get it to the people in other places. And this, if we wait for the regulators to come down, I think that might take a while. So I think we need to work hand in hand with the local players to make sure that that distribution chain is uninterrupted. Thank you, Brett.
Excellent. Thanks, Stephen. Avinash, a couple of closing points from you.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. From my side, like I would say that, like, yes, there should be more capacity building should be in place, so that like we can utilize those for or any kind of like pharma products. It could be vaccines or APIs or finished formulations or biologics. And another is about temperature monitoring, so that we'll be having a complete the data about like what is the flow during the transit and whether it is in that range and how we can mitigate that risk. So that's one point. And another will be about track and trace. So track and trace will again help us to minimize the counterfeit, which happens like nowadays, and that can be minimized. So these are some of the 3 points which I think like are the critical one where need to be worked upon and it can be improved.
Fantastic. Thanks, Avinash. Dr. Uttam, a couple of closing bullets from you.
Yeah, Brett. Yeah, cold chain is the future for sure, no doubt about it. And how to make it effective, according to me, the supply chain, we can think of digitalization. We can make it digital, so it will be more faster. Second is risk-based, safety risk-based approach, because this is a very long process, clinical trials, etc. So how to make the proper risk assessment for getting the speedy approval from the authority, because very important. Otherwise, there's no meaning of having this kind of product. Number 3, the knowledge sharing, because still the whole world is learning how to validate, how to make effective validation. Like, for example, Zuellig Pharma is very expert in GDP. So if they share this knowledge with other distributor, they will also learn. And as a one world, one team, we can achieve this target of having cold chain product, because they are very fast active, less side effect. So yeah, thanks, Brett.
Excellent. Thanks, Dr. Uttam. Chris?
There we go, off mute. Thank you, Brett. I see my sort of key moments for the forward. Going forward, I think we probably almost need to redefine cold chain. Cold chain is just one of the aspects that probably we're looking at dependencies, and maybe we redefine our new terminology to be, international healthcare chains, because to be truly integrated, there's a whole lot of dependencies. It's manufacturing dependencies, there's regulatory, there's equipment, people, resource planning, and it is a level higher than just temperature monitoring. As I said, you can have a really good temperature control, but unless the other things are in place, the effectiveness of that investment can be gone. And as I was saying before, I'm handling shipments of Pfizer through Bangkok Airport to Bhutan, ambient. They're just going in boxes, safe boxes. So the cold chain is actually the technologies that keep the product cold, not necessarily the transportation aspects. But it still requires very, very good tracking and tracing capabilities. There needs to be some integration standards to help developing countries, preventing them having to go through and reinvent the wheel as far as what a standard healthcare end-to-end system is about, and at various levels of maturity. So there should be a developing country in the Pacific Islands should be able to get an off-the-shelf logistics toolkit or template and be able to implement it. Includes allocation processes, committees, basic inventory control systems that can link in with maybe the agencies, UNICEF or Gavi or whatever. The second thing is resilience. We should be building not just for a one-off wave. We should be building resilience in that healthcare chain that is sustainable over a longer period of time. We haven't even talked about wastage and biohazard reduction and all this sort of stuff. There's going to be several billion syringes produced, and we know we don't have a very good record in Southeast Asia for disposal even of our domestic plastics. let alone biohazards and sharps and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And the other one is, you know, we are fortunate to all be in relatively developed countries. There's a whole mass of countries out there, you know, the smaller islands, the East Asian, you know, the countries that don't have and struggle even with basic standards of quality of life. There's a whole area of development we have to accommodate with not high cost, but very practical and simple solutions that we as a profession need to integrate better. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Well, I think that brings us to a close for our panel today, and I'd like to thank my panelists, Stephen, Avinash, Dr. Uttam and Chris, for fantastic content. We've covered a lot of territory today. We've talked about product development, we've talked about regulatory frameworks, we've talked about supply chains and supply networks. We've talked about the types of infrastructure that's being put in place, the different technologies that are becoming available, and just how important planning and transparency are going to be for the future. But also that demand for cold chain infrastructure systems, processes and technologies will continue to be very strong based on the growing requirement for biologicals and biosimilars and vaccine products for the future. So it's been great to be with you this morning. I'm again very much thankful to my co-panelists for sharing their ideas and their thoughts. It's been a great opportunity. Prashant, thank you to you and your team for organising this event and this panel, and look forward to staying in contact with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Brett. It's a pleasure hosting all speakers and you. And thanks a lot to attendees for attending this particular session. Please note that we are organizing a virtual exhibition parallel to this conference. So we request you to please interact with exhibitors. Virtual edition is from 20th to 24th of September, and the timing is 10 to 5 p.m. That is Thai time. Asia Warehousing Show and Asia Cold Chain Show, face-to-face show, we are going to organize from 1st to 3rd of December in Bangkok at BITEC Bangna. So wish you all to stay safe and stay healthy. Swadikap.
Thanks, Prashant.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone.
Thank you, folks.